All right, we're wrapping up our time with discussing Jesus and what he's teaching us in the experience of the road to Emmaus. Now, we've come to the end of the story. Jesus has said the blessing, and the story tells us that while he is saying the prayer, that they begin to recognize who he is. Cleopas and his friend begin to recognize who Jesus is, and he disappears. Now, to me, the story needs some kind of ending. I need Cleopas being converted. I need some kind of closure here. Yeah, a bow to wrap it up. But there's not. Jesus just kind of leaves it with that. Now, Cleopas and his friend run back to Jerusalem. The story picks up from there, but he doesn't force that.
No. The greatest thing about being involved in the work of Christ and the work of God is that we just have our few seconds in eternity, and we enter into that and we do our part, and we trust that God has his part and he's going to continue on with the process. I like the little parable in Mark chapter 5, real short parable, where it says that the farmer goes out, he plants a seed, he goes home and he goes to sleep, and the next thing you know, he goes out there and he has a harvest. And in conclusion, he said, he knows not how.
So, to the point you're making, it's not up to us to close the sale or to bring them into heaven. It's our job to simply continue to plant the seed and to be faithful in this process. I think sometimes we cheapen the gospel by becoming hyper salesmen of the gospel. The harder we try to sell it, then the worse the product actually looks. But it does frustrate us in that you do the best job you can in telling someone about Christ, and they don't respond yet.
Yeah, it doesn't mean that we don't have an urgency to our mission and what we're called to do, but we understand, back to last week's lesson, that our role is as witnesses. Our job is to be faithful, to do what God's called us to do, to point back to him, to tell other people about him, and that we can't contrive or force or manipulate. That's the role of the Holy Spirit, is to convict. And so this is a partnership, to use that language, that we enter into with God, that God allows us to be a part of. You know, it's supposed to be a joyful process for us. And sometimes we tend to squeeze the life out of what's supposed to be life, because we have our tactics, our methods, and we want to see results, and by golly, we want to see them right now. But I know that we all have stories of people that we've engaged. I have a story of a young man that I engaged 10 years ago that we are still in conversation on. And, you know, back then it was email or AOL Instant Messenger, and now it's Facebook. I mean, we've gone through that many types of social media. But continuing the conversation of what it means to be a follower of Christ. He's a huge skeptic. And so sometimes that journey, that, you know, we just have to be faithful, continue to point to the work of the Holy Spirit in Jesus Christ.
And it takes the pressure, to me, off of manipulation. The person now does not feel manipulated. I learned an evangelism approach back when I was in high school. It says you always ask yes questions, and then whenever the person gets to the end, they've been saying yes for about 10 times now, and they're automatically going to say yes. So I tried that a few times, and I got a few yeses, but nothing ever happened. There was no results.
Yeah, absolutely. Like we train our child workers with children. You know, do you want to go to hell? No. Okay, you know, everybody's going to say no to that kind of reasoning. But
Jesus did not manipulate these two guys.
Right.
He left the final decision up to them.
Yeah, they were free to respond, however.
And we have to be free. We may want our children to act in a certain way, but we have to let them be free to say yes or no, to make their own hard knocks, and then they'll be a whole lot better.
But even in that, there was this, you know, Cleopas and his friend tell each other, didn't our hearts burn within us? So there is this creation of a desire to see something, to know something, but just to trust that process. You know, Jesus did talk a lot about agriculture, and it is planting the seed and waiting, and it is watering and waiting, and cultivating the soil some more, weeding and waiting before you get to the harvest. And I don't know, and I think now, given the world views that so many people have, that evangelism, authentic evangelism, is actually slower now, because we have to begin. We don't begin at ground zero.
That's right.
We begin. We're hostile. Then you got to work back, like your friend, 10 years just to get him into a conversation at a serious level about what faith is. And I don't know When you were working in Brazil, was there an understanding of time and how long it would take?
Well, what we found is that people who understood evangelism as a process were a lot more effective than those who thought it as an event. That one of the difficulties, I was using the word evangelism as a process, and a lot of the people I was around was an event, that it is going out to the park and handing out tracts. But they didn't have the results. But the ones that spent the time and cultivated, because when you receive Christ, you're changing your worldview, because in Brazil it was being Brazilian, it's being Catholic, it's thinking a certain way, and now all of a sudden you've got some major changes, and that change takes time.
Yeah, for it to be real.
That's it starts on the inside and works its way out versus the outside tactics that really press you out here, and it's an attempt to work from the outside in, but the kingdom is never about that. It's always about the seed, as we were talking about a little bit ago, the idea that God brings life all the way back from Genesis 1. And then He helps us understand how we partner with Him to water that, to nurture that, and to see it grow ultimately.
You know, the interesting thing about part of this conversation is we often talk about, can we get somebody else to believe? The interesting thing is Jesus believed His own message enough to trust it. So maybe the question we need to ask ourselves is, do we believe the gospel enough to trust it to do its work once we're faithful in it?
Yeah, it's like a car salesman. You go into a car salesman, say you're in a Ford dealership, and he said, this car is all right, but I'm not for sure that it's as good as that Chevrolet down the street. Yeah. I believe what I'm telling you is the truth, and it comes out. And part of taking the pressure away is knowing that you're right, and knowing, without being arrogant, knowing that this is the truth, and then you can rest in that.
And it's been tested, and if you go off and test it, you're going to find it to be true for yourself. Okay. Well, Jay, Ray, thank you for being part of this journey as we have followed Jesus on His own journey on His road to Emmaus. So after Jesus prayed, He just left. To me, that was kind of a funny way to end the story. I want it to be tied up neatly. But Jesus was comfortable enough with who He was, who He is, and the gospel He was bringing to us to trust it to do its own work. So don't be surprised if you find yourself in a conversation with someone that takes days, weeks, months, and you end up planting a seed and waiting, watering and waiting. But what do you do while you're waiting? First of all, you pray. You pray a lot. Second, you prepare, you study, you work on your own relationship with Christ so that when the next conversation comes, you will be ready to be led by the Holy Spirit in that moment. So here's your assignment. Again, work on your own relationship with Jesus Christ so that you're always living out of the overflow. And second, pray. Pray for your friends who are in process, who are on this journey. And lastly, always be ready for the moment that the conversation starts, and then you'll know what to say for that person to come to know Jesus Christ even as you do.